Tonight, we are taking a look at the first section of the English portion. Tonight's is the test prep, so we will go over conventions of standard English, foundations, like all the concepts you need to know to be successful in this section of the test. And then we will be back same time, same place on Wednesday night, and we will go through some practice questions together so that you kind of get a feel for what to expect on your test. Before we get started though, sorry, I've switched screens up. So everything's a little backwards for me tonight. But before we get started, just a few resources to share with everyone. If you're not familiar with all of our resources, we do have a question bank that is growing by the day. If you find that, Wednesday you do the practice questions and you're like, man, I really want some more practice with this. Well, make sure to check out our Q bank. It has all of our subjects covered. With that Q bank, you get a free demo, but you also get over 2,000 questions. And with those questions, you get the rationale. So it explains why the correct answer is correct, but also why the other answers are incorrect, which oftentimes when you're studying for your test, that can be even more helpful. With those rationales, you also get some study sheets. And then if you want a deeper dive, because remember tonight we only have an hour. So if you find that you want a little bit deeper dive into the topics we cover tonight or any other areas, you can use our on-demand videos to check. Ooh, I can't talk tonight. To check out specific subjects. And the great thing about the on-demand videos is that you can use the timestamps to go straight to the topic you need to focus on. So you don't have to sit there and go through an hour-long video just to get to the last like 15 minutes and you want to watch 5 minutes of it. You can really just narrow down what you need to look at. If you are interested in tutoring, you have our link right here. We have all subjects covered. If you don't see a time that works for you, reach out to us because a lot of times we can maybe shift our schedules around or we can see what we can open up or let you know, what we're able to do to help you. If you are looking for English or reading, for example, and you don't see a time that's up there that works for you, email me at tammy.summerlin@archerreview, and then we'll just see what we can do. If you are interested in our upcoming free live webinars, make sure to check out this link. We are going to be switching things up. So like this week, I'll be doing English. In 2 weeks, I'll be back with the reading. And then in August, we're actually going to switch it up again. And we've got some new exciting things coming with webinars. So make sure to check out our free live webinars here so you can get our schedule for August. June's is, I mean, heavens, I've already backtracked. July's is already up, so make sure to check out what we've got coming up. If you want to go back and rewatch any webinars, you've got the link here. And if you're interested in any of our resources, make sure to check out our bundle packages. So if you're trying to save some money, which, I mean, aren't we all? Make sure to check out SurePass if you're interested in the QBank and on-demand videos because you can bundle those two together and get a little bit of a discount. If you're interested in tutoring with the other resources, you can take the SurePass Pro and get a discount on question bank, on-demand videos, and tutoring. You can even get a free tutoring session out of that. So, any questions before we keep going? All right then. So this is just a quick screenshot of SurePass and SurePass Pro. I actually just covered pretty much everything that this says. So make sure to take a screenshot if you are interested. But again, SurePass Pro is a really great way to go because you get that free tutoring session out of it. Um, if you haven't, make sure to check us out on our socials. So we've got Instagram. Some of you are joining from there now. Some of you are looking at us from Facebook, and make sure to check out our TikTok because we've got great resources there. Brandon goes live, I think it's every Friday, to chat with you guys. So make sure to check that out. And then if you are interested in tutoring, make sure to check out our links here. These are our direct QR codes. So you can check out our schedules, see what we've got available. Again, I know mine are booking up, but if you have a time that you don't see, but you really want to see if you can get that time, just email me. All right. Well, we're not going to waste any time. We're going to jump right on in. We're going to take a look tonight at 3 different subsections of that first English portion. So E1.1 talks about spelling conventions and patterns. 1.2 looks at punctuation practices. And 1.3 looks at correct sentence structure. So diving right on into that first section, spelling conventions and patterns, this is one of the ones that people underestimate because they think, well, I've been spelling and, writing my whole life, so this is easy breezy. But the thing is that this section can be very tricky because there are so many exception rules that people have just not been exposed to in their academic lives. So, we're going to talk about a couple of the common ones, but do a little bit of a twist and really make sure that you understand the concepts of these. So, we're going to look at the I before E, except after C. Uh-oh. Hold on. I just lost my other screen. Hold on. Talk about crippling. Oh, this is scary. The whole thing went black. Let's see if I can get you back. I don't know what's going to come up and what's not. I think everybody's still okay. Everybody's still okay? Is everything still sharing? Let me check and make sure everything's still sharing. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Oh, that was the scariest feeling ever. So, I before E, except after C is what many of you have probably learned, but we're going to take a look at that a little bit closer. Dropping the final E rule, changing the final Y to an I, and doubling a final consonant, what that all means. So, going straight to the I before E. A lot of us grew up hearing that little sing-songy little thing saying I before E, except after C. However, it really probably wasn't explained to you in the full concept. So, with the I before E, that's the general rule itself. The general rule is I before E. So, when you're spelling a word, if there's an I and an E that are used side by side, okay, we're not talking about a word that just has an I and has an E in it, like, what is it, Wheel of Fortune? Let me get an I, let me get an E. It's not just willy-nilly anywhere. It's that they're side by side. How do we know which one comes first and which one comes second when they're side by side like that? Uh-oh, you can't see. Oh, Instagram, and I just knew that was gonna go down when it. Okay, hold on. Thank you, Instagram, for letting me know. I was afraid my screen was gonna do that when it didn't connect or when it disconnected. All right, try this. Are you back? Are you with me now? All right, Instagram, let me know if it's not back. It says it's back, but it doesn't really ever show me anything different except for the first slide. Oh, awesome. Okay. Oh, I tell you, technology, it's just lovely. So with the I before E, if there's an I and there's an E and they're side by side, how are we going to know which one to put first and which one to put second? Well, thank you for asking. So typically, if you're going to use an I and an E, then the I should be located before the E. Okay? So for example, with the word believe, I before E, right there. Just right there. Okay? So that's the general rule. Easy, right? Well, then you got to throw in exceptions. So with English, you will never hear me say, oh, 100% of the time. There's only maybe one thing in grammar I'm ever going to say that about. Because 99.9% of the time, there's going to be an exception to every single grammar rule. Don't ask me why. I don't know. But there are a lot of exception rules to the I before E. We're going to talk about a couple of them tonight. You're welcome, Instagram. Thank you for letting me know. Um, and with that, we're going to start with the except after C rule. So I before E, except after C. It's the most popular. It's usually the only one that most people have heard about. I actually was in college. Don't tell anybody this. But I was in college before I actually learned that there were other exception rules besides I before E, except after C. It just wasn't covered when I was in primary school. I had to start taking grammar electives in college to learn this. So you will not use an I before an E if there is a C connected to it. So for example, if you have the three letters I, E, and C, and they're going to be located next to each other, and the C comes first. So if there's a C first, then you will not put the I first. Instead, you will put the E first. So I before E, except when it comes after C. So right here in the word ceiling, C comes first. So we're going to put EI instead. All right. I saw somebody raise their hand on Zoom. If you've got a question, just put it in the chat box. If you were just waving, then hello. So C. If the C comes first, put the E and then the I. So this is an exception rule. So keep that in mind when you're reading for certain questions. Now, with the I before E, as I said, there are several other exception rules besides just the C. A lot of people have never heard of I before E except when it sounds like an A. So if you've ever looked at the word beige or the word neighbor and you're like, well, why does that E comes first, but there's no C there? So it's not that exception, is it? No, it's not. So when the E comes first here, it's because when you pronounce the word, a lot of times with these exception rules, it's going to be because of the pronunciation of the word. So when I say the word, and you guys are going to have to just bear with me here, okay? So, hello there. Um, so when you're going to have to bear with me, you're going to hear my very deep southern accent, and I'm going to say it really, really strong for you. So when I say the word beige, you hear it? Beige, A. It makes that A sound. Just like with nay, nay, neighbor, it's going to have nay. It's making that A sound to it. So when you're trying to pronunciate the word and it makes that A sound, or you want the word to make the A sound, that's why you're going to have to put the E first and then the I. So we will not follow the rule I before E because we want it to sound like that A sound. Okay, so when you have words that want to make that A sound, you're going to put the E first instead of the I. So keep that in the back of your memory, okay? Now, every time you think of a horse, you're going to think neigh, and then you're going to think, the lady with the deep southern accent. Now, there are several other exceptions, and we just unfortunately do not have enough time tonight to dive into all of them. Hello, Zoom. Do you have a question? It keeps popping up that you're waving, but I don't know what that means. Um, So there are other exceptions though with other different words. So there's neither when it makes that I sound, weird when it makes the sound, foreign, leisure, seas, codeine when it makes the long E sound. So make sure that if you're not familiar with these concepts and you see that these are questions that you're missing, make sure to check out our on-demand videos because we have a whole collection of diving into those exception rules there. Now, another rule that we're going to talk about with spelling is dropping the final E. When do we do it and when do we not? So, when you have a word, a root word that typically ends in an E, how are we going to know when to drop that E off when we're adding a suffix to it? Well, with the word believe, let's go right back to that. It ends in an E. Now, if I'm going to add a suffix that begins with a vowel, like the suffix able right here, it starts with that A. If I'm going to add a suffix that begins with an A, excuse me, not an A, but a vowel, any vowel, so I'm going to drop that E off. Essentially, it's because we do not want to have those double vowels side by side. We don't need to put an E and an A side by side. It's too much. It's got too much going on. So when you have a suffix and you are going to, that suffix is going to start with a vowel, you are going to drop the E off of the root word. Same thing with advise, ends in an E. If we add the suffix ing to it, it's starting with a vowel, so we drop the E off and just add the suffix right to the end of it. Same thing with guidance. We drop that E off because we're adding the suffix that starts with the vowel A. So we just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. We're going to put it all together and drop that E off. Now, we talked about if the suffix begins with a vowel. But if the suffix begins with a consonant, so that's every letter in the alphabet except for A, E, I, O, and U, then you will just leave the E on the end of the root word. So, for example, nicely. The word nice ends in an E. The suffix ly begins with the consonant L. So, we just leave the E and add that suffix right to the end of it. Just combine them together. Same thing with amaze and mint, because mint is a suffix that starts with the consonant M. We're just going to add it right to the end of amaze. And then with rude and the ness, you just do the same thing because the consonant N connects it right to the E. Easy peasy, right? It's really just the vowels you got to watch out for. So if a suffix is starting with a vowel, just know that you got to drop that E off. Now, as I said, there's always going to be an exception to every rule out there. So with the dropping the E, if you have, there's a couple different ones, but if you have a root word that has a double vowel on the end of it already, like the word agree does, it's got that EE double vowel, then when you add that suffix that starts with a vowel, you're not going to need to drop that off because guess what? You're probably thinking, well, I got to drop it off because it's putting two vowels side by side. Well, if you drop that E off right here, if I take that off and hide it, look, you already got another one right there. So you still got the same problem, but you've already dropped it. So you can't do it again. So with the double vowel at the end already, you don't drop the E, you just put it all together. And you just have triple vowels. It's okay to have the triple vowels, I guess. They just thought, that's fine. Triple, that's fine. But double, no. And then with advantage, when we add that and the suffix starts with the vowel, we're still going to leave the E because it's a vowel, consonant, vowel. It's all about that. That's one of those exception rules. Make sure to check out the on-demand videos so that you can get a closer look at that if you're not familiar with this. So we've talked about the I before E, talked about dropping the final E. Let's talk about when do we change from a Y to an I. So if you have a suffix, it's all about the suffixes, you know? So when you have a suffix and the root word ends in a Y, okay? So if we're adding a suffix to a word that ends in a Y, and that Y has a consonant in front of it, then you're going to change the Y to an I and add your suffix to the end. What do I mean? Okay, so it's really easy to see it when it's in action. If I have the root word beauty, it ends in a Y. Let's look at the letter that's right in front of it, T. T is a consonant. Because I have a consonant in front of the Y, when I add a suffix, doesn't matter which one, but when I add a suffix to the end of it, I'm going to drop that Y off and I'm going to change it to an I to connect the root word to the suffix. Same thing with worry. It's a root word that ends in a Y. It has a consonant right before the Y. It's the R right there. And then I'm going to add on the suffix ed. Okay. So when I do that, because I've got that consonant before the Y, I'm going to drop the Y and change it to an I and just attach that suffix right to the end of it. Now you will not change the Y to an I if the Y has a vowel in front of it. So with the word day, for example, A comes before Y, it's a vowel. So when I add the suffix S to make it plural to the end of it, I'm just going to leave that Y alone. I'm not going to change it at all because it's already got a vowel. It's kind of going back to that same concept of we don't want to put multiple vowels side by side. So if we drop the Y and changed it to an I, then it would be A-I-S, and that would just be a lot going on. Obey, Y with an E in front of it, so that's a consonant. I mean, that's a vowel, excuse me. And we're adding on that suffix. So we leave the Y alone and just add the suffix right to the end. Same thing with relay. It's got the A just like day, and you leave it alone. All right. Now, you're not going to change the Y to an I if the suffix ends in an I. So if, for example, you add the suffix ing, that's like my go-to when I'm checking things, ing. So if I have the Y here at the end of cry, it has that consonant in front of it. So you're thinking, oh, well, I'm going to drop that and change it to an I. Well, when we add a suffix that starts with an I, then you would be putting a double I side by side. And then that's just a lot going on too. So we leave the Y and we just add the suffix onto the end. Same thing with worry. So when we added the ed suffix onto the end of it, we dropped the Y and changed it to an I. But if we're adding a suffix that starts with an I, then you have to leave it alone because we can't put those I's side by side together. Same thing with supply. If you add that ing, you leave it alone. Now, there are a couple exceptions. So, again, like I said, we don't have a lot of time to dive into this really deeply. Check out the on demand videos, but check out why shy and Lee, when you put those together, you leave them alone. Day and then Lee, when you put those, why does that? So, make sure to check out the on demand videos and make sure that you've glossed up on that before you go into your test. Now, before I do this next one on the double consonant, does anybody have any questions? We've covered 3 concepts so far with the spelling. Zoom, did you have a question? I see the hand raised, but I don't see anything with it. Oh, that's a nice one. Vowel before the Y, let it fly. And consonant before Y, say goodbye. That's a nice one to share. Thank you for sharing that with us. All right, so we'll head into our last spelling rule that we're going to talk about for tonight, doubling a final consonant. So this is one that trips people up, and again, this is just, a brief overview of it, so make sure to get some practice with this. But if you have a short one-syllable word that ends in a consonant, like the word run, and it has one vowel before it, and then you're going to double that consonant at the end if you are adding ing, ed, er, or est suffixes. So, for example, if I take run and I want to add this suffix ing to the end of it, because it ends with a consonant and it has that one vowel in front of it, and it's a one syllable word, run, I'm going to double up on that N, running. Okay? And you can also hear it when you pronounce it. Run ing. Run. It's got to have that long stretched out. Same thing with hop. Hop ing. We're going to double up on the consonant that it ends in because it only has that one vowel in front of it. Now, if you have a longer word that's 2 or more syllables, then if the last syllable is stressed, so that means it has that hard pronunciation to it, and it ends in a single vowel with the consonant, then you're going to double up on whatever that final consonant is that you're stressing. So for example, with begin, begin, 2 syllables, it ends in that hard consonant N, has that one vowel in front of it. So we're going to double up on that N, and that's why you have Beginnning. Same thing with forget. You can hear how it's got that harsh consonant on the end of it. Forget. It's got that heavy stress to it. So because it's got that T is being stressed, it's got that vowel with the E, the one vowel there. We're going to double up and add a TT. It'll have a TT. Forgetting. Now, you would not double up that consonant when the last syllable is not stressed. Okay, so for example, with open, hear the difference. A lot of people say, well, it ends in the consonant N, but listen to the difference when you say it. Begin. Hear how it's stressed harder there than open. It's kind of fades off on the end of it. So with those, with listen, with visit. They're not hard, like visit versus forget. You can really hear the T being enunciated. So you really have to think about, again, how it does it sound when it's being pronounced. All right. Now, with I can't talk. It's like tongue twisters tonight. With misspelled, it's not only about knowing the spelling rules like the I before E, changing the Y to an I. It's also about remembering trick words like homophones and then apostrophes. Those apostrophes, a lot of people don't remember. Apostrophes can affect the spelling of a word. Inappropriate separation or joining, and then compounds. So let's take a quick refresh on what these are. And then again, if you need a deeper dive, make sure to check out those on-demand videos. So what is a homophone? Well, a homophone is going to be two or more words that have the same pronunciation, but they have different meanings, origins, or they might be spelled differently, or all three. So, for example, if I have the word new in EW, it sounds the same when I pronounce it as new, KNEW, but you can clearly see that they're spelled differently. They also mean different things. If I say new NEW, I mean something that's just come about. Okay, so like it's brand new. But if I say new KNEW, I'm talking about the past tense of know. So I knew him. Sounds the same, means something different. And then if when you're dealing with these words too, also be careful with I read the book yesterday. When you read it out loud, red sounds right, but red or ed is the color. So that wouldn't be the correct spelling to use in that sentence. Now, I don't have it listed here, but also with homophones, also think about homographs. So, words that are spelled the same, but they mean something different. Now, with apostrophes, words that can contain an apostrophe, they can also cause misspellings. So think about the pronoun it. If I just put its and I add an ets onto the end of it, that means I'm showing possession. The dog lost its bone. Okay? So I'm showing possession. Whose bone is it? It's its bone. But if I add an apostrophe s onto the end of it, I'm taking that pronoun and I'm making it into a contraction of it is. So that means two separate things. It's doing two separate things, two parts of speech. Okay? So be careful of that because that can oftentimes change the spelling, especially if you're dealing with those contractions. It changes the spelling and it changes the meaning of the words. Now, be careful for inappropriate separation or joining. What does this mean? Well, I haven't seen too many of these, but I have seen them in the past. So I always like to share this just because you never know when something's going to come back and haunt you. So, if you have inappropriate separation, so that means words are split apart when they shouldn't be, or they're put together when they shouldn't be. A great example of this is because. So, if I were to have the separation because, a lot of people think, oh, well, it's just because it's all one word, but you actually can have them separated and it means something different. So if I say her dedication and hard work proved to be cause for her promotion, what was the reason for her promotion? It was be it was to be cause for her promotion. But if I say or be the reason for an action. But if I say because as one word, that's for the reason or by the reason. I was late because my car broke down. So what was the reason or by the reason? It was the car breaking down. So that's an example of a separation of words versus a joining of words. So it could be vice versa. And then a very common one, a lot, a space LOT, two separate words. This means many or very much. A lot, when you put it together, this is actually not a real word. People will fight me on this, but it's actually not a real word. It's just used inappropriately or used incorrectly so much, it's kind of just become accepted. But it's actually not a real word. People are really trying to say a lot, where it's separated. And then a lot, A-L-L-O-T, this is actually a completely different word. It means to assign or to be distributed. So again, changes the meaning of the word, changes the meaning of the sentence. And then with compounds, this is very similar to the inappropriate separation or joining. So ice cream, some people have, mistakenly thought ice cream was one word. High school, a lot of times people will put a hyphen in it. It doesn't need the hyphen. Full time, it's not a complete word. It does need a hyphen. And then mother-in-law, any of the in-laws, they need hyphens to separate them. So make sure to familiarize yourself with compound words and how they should be connected or not connected. In this section, you also want to make sure to check for singular versus plural. So when it goes from man to men, be careful of these words that are irregular. When you have a dog and you want to make it plural, you just add an S on the end of it. You say dogs. But there are several words that are, they're not common ones, and they are what we call the irregular ones, irregular nouns. So when they change from singular to plural, they change their spelling. Man becomes men, goose becomes geese, cactus becomes cacti, child becomes children, life, anything that ends in IFE is typically going to change to VES at the end. So lives, boxes, anything that ends in an X is going to have an ES at the end. Coach, anything with CH is going to have that ES at the end when you change it to plural. So again, yes, we're going from singular to plural, but this also falls under the realm of making sure that things are spelled correctly. So that wraps up 1.1. We're flying through, but we're running out of time, so we're going to speed it up as best we can. So 1.2, standard punctuation. Now with this section, you really need to make sure that you know your different sentence types. So simple, compound, complex, compound, complex. Okay? So you must be able to identify different sentence types in order to be able to tell if something is punctuated correctly. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We may not want to do it, but you got to know your sentence types. Now, I will tell you a heads up. If you're not familiar with sentence types, you're not taking your TEAS in the next week or two, make sure to check out our live webinar because I have a webinar coming up that's really going to hone in on this. So if this is something you struggle with sentence types, make sure to check out what's coming up soon. But sentence types, you have simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. Those are the four different types of sentences you must make sure that you can identify. So with that, we need to take a step back and remember that clauses, what are clauses? Well, a clause is a group of words that's going to contain a subject and a verb, and it might, depending on what type of clause it is, contain a complete thought. If it's an independent clause, it's going to have that subject, it's going to have that verb, but it's also going to have that complete thought. Okay, we can walk up to Billy Bob on the street and he'll know exactly what we're taking. Oh, you're taking your test this Friday. Oh, well, we will be thinking of you. If you have any last minute questions, I've got a couple of tutoring sessions coming up, so you could pop in, ask me any questions you want to. You got my email, let me know. But with independent, subject, verb, and make sure you have that complete thought. It needs to be fully developed. Now, if it's a dependent clause, yes, you're still going to have a subject. Yes, you're going to have a verb because if it's a clause, independent or dependent, it's got to have the subject and got to have the verb. But with a dependent clause, you're going to be missing that complete thought. You're going to walk up to Billy Bob on the street, you're going to say it, and he's going to look at you like you are a two-headed cow. Oh, you're so welcome, you do. So if I have the independent clause, the rain makes me sleepy. Subject of that sentence would be rain. Okay. I know who that sentence is about. It's about the rain. What does the rain do? It makes. And it makes me sleepy. That's my complete thought. But with the dependent clause, while the rain continues to pour down. Yep, it's got that subject rain still. Continues is my verb. And while it looks like the rain continues to pour down would be a complete sentence, it would be an independent clause. Because it's got the word while in front of it, it means that it's not going to be a complete thought. Okay? So, what about while the rain continues to pour down? Hmm? You know? Did you stand out there and get soaking wet? Did you hide under the covers in your bed? You know, what you doing? So, we don't know. Billy Bob is sitting there and he's all confused as all get out. So, independent, it's got the complete thought. Dependent, no complete thought. So with those clauses, you need to make sure that you can take them and find what's an independent versus what's a dependent clause. Because if you can't do that, then you won't be able to find what type of sentence it is. Okay? It really always builds from one to the next. So with a simple sentence, what you're doing is you're looking for that one independent clause. Okay? Do I have a subject? Do I have a verb? Do I have a complete thought? Easy peasy, right? Yep. Simple sentences can be that way. So the rain makes me very sleepy. When you have that one independent clause, you've got that simple sentence, okay? You only need that punctuation at the end. Now, there are some, oops, I didn't mean to go there. So there are some exceptions. So, for example, if it were to have an introductory phrase or a transition word at the beginning of the sentence, you may see a prepositional phrase, you may see a transition word offset by a comma. But remember, we're looking to see, do we have clauses, independent or dependent? So if it's a clause, it's going to have a subject and a verb. If it doesn't, it probably means you're looking at a prepositional phrase. They will be offset by commas majority of the time if they come at the beginning of a sentence. Same thing with the transition word. So if I would say, next, the rain makes me sleepy. So next would just be a transition word. Okay. Now with compound sentences, this is where you look at a sentence and you're like, oh, there's an independent clause and there's a second independent clause. A compound sentence is made up of two independent clauses. Now, with two independent clauses for this section of the TEAS, you need to make sure that you can find those two independent clauses and see how they're being connected together. Because there's several different ways that compound sentences can be connected. One, and the most common, is that you take what we call a fanboys, okay, more specifically known as a coordinating conjunction. So, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Now, if you put a fanboys, a coordinating conjunction, in between two independent clauses, you're going to have a compound sentence, but you got to make sure that you put a comma, see that right there before so? You got to put the comma in front of the coordinating conjunction, not behind, that's the one that gets people tripped up, but in front of the coordinating conjunction. So in the sentence, the storm arrives this afternoon. That is an independent clause. I need to bring in my patio furniture. That is an independent clause. I'm connecting it with the coordinating conjunction so. And when I do that, I'm making sure, what's that thing? Be mindful, be demure. Well, we're going to be mindful to make sure that there's a comma in front of that coordinating conjunction. Okay? If there's not, then there's a punctuation issue, and that's probably what they're trying to trip you up on in your question. So make sure that if you have two independent clauses, they're connected by that fanboys, by that coordinating conjunction, that you put the comma in front of that conjunction. Now, another way that it can be correctly done is just to put a simple semicolon between the two clauses. Okay, that's it. Just the semicolon. You don't have to put a conjunction. You can just put the semicolon, and that works fine and dandy. So that is a correct way. A lot of people see that as an answer option and are like, well, that's not correct. Yep, it actually is. You can put just a semicolon right between them. Now, another common way, and I haven't seen this too much, but I've seen it pop up as a trick question. You can just, it doesn't make it a compound sentence, but if you get a question and you're like, well, which of the following is grammatically correct? If there's an independent clause, a period, and then an independent clause, and then another period, guess what? It's not a compound sentence. So if they're asking you about compound, that's not right. But I want to throw this out there because if you put a period in an independent clause, It's grammatically correct. Okay? That's like one of those rare trick unicorn questions. So don't let that get you. Now, complex sentences, this is going to be a complex feature. So it has an independent clause, yes. It also has a dependent clause. That's what makes it complex. Compound, you're just putting two like things together. Complex, we got a little bit of variety in our life, you know? So you're going to put one independent clause and one dependent clause together. Now, here's the trick about complex sentences with their two different types of clauses. You got to pay attention to which clause is coming first. If your independent clause is going to come first and then it's followed by that dependent clause, no punctuation will be needed except for the period at the end of the sentence. Okay? So, for example, if I say, I need to bring in my patio furniture, we've already established that that's an independent clause. And then I have the clause before the storm arrives. Well, that's a dependent clause. So since the independent clause is coming first, we've got that dependent clause that starts with a subordinated conjunction. You do not have to put a comma between the two clauses. On the flip side of that, though, if the if the dependent clause comes first and is then followed by the independent clause, you have to put a comma between them. So if I flip that around and I say before the storm arrives, that's my dependent clause. My subordinating conjunction is up here at the beginning of the sentence. So I have my independent clause following. I need to bring in my patio furniture. I have to put in that comma there to separate the two clauses. Okay. And it's actually essentially, I'm getting tongue tied again. I'm getting so excited. This is like my favorite thing to talk about, y'all. I know, nerd status 101, but whatever, here we are. So with these, you use that comma as a connector. Here in the other one, when the independent clause came first and the dependent clause came second, that subordinate conjunction was acting as the glue to hold them together. Okay, so you really just have to have something to hold them together. And with compound complex, I know I'm flying, but we only got like 10 minutes left. So with compound complex sentences, make sure that you can find your clauses. This means you're going to have at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. Okay. You might have more. I mean, bless your heart. I'm going to pray for you if you got more than that because that's a lot going on, but it could happen. I've seen it happen, but again, those are rare unicorns. But with a compound complex sentence, you have to have at least two independent clauses and one dependent clause. For the sake of your sanity, I beg you please go find your clauses in those sentences. Okay? It's going to save us all a lot of heartbreak and trauma that we'll need therapy for. No, I'm just kidding. But it'll make your life so much easier if you go find all the clauses in that sentence. So find where your independent clauses are. One, two, there's going to be two of them. And then find where your dependent clause is. Why? Because you're going to take what we've already talked about. What are the rules for those compound sentences? What are the rules for those complex sentences? And then you got to put them together based on the position of where each clause came from. So, if my dependent clause comes first before the storm arrives, and then it's followed by an independent clause, I need to put my patio furniture away, I'm going to follow the rule we just talked about with complex sentences. The dependent clause comes first, followed by the independent clause. I'm going to put this comma right here between them. But we're not done yet. You've got this independent clause. I need to put my patio furniture away. And then you see, I need to move my car. That's a separate independent clause. I've got that coordinating conjunction fanboy right here, and so I'm going to put the comma in front of it, okay? And then that's going to connect my two independent clauses. If I move it around and I put independent clause first, I need to put my patio furniture away. I need to move my car. Those are still two independent clauses being connected by that conjunction, that coordinating conjunction. So I'm going to put the comma in front of it. But since the dependent clause has been moved to the end before the storm arrives and it's coming after an independent clause, we do not now have to put that comma here, like we did up here. Okay. Any questions about that? It's a lot we just packed into that little section. All right. A couple comma rules. Keep this in mind for this section with punctuation. When you are listing items, if there are three or more items, you will use a comma. So I need to buy milk and bread. I'm only listing two, I don't need a comma. But if I'm listing three, so I'm really needy, I need milk, bread, and eggs. If you are following the Oxford comma rule, you always have to put the comma between the first two because there's no other conjunct, there's no connector. But with following the Oxford comma rule, you're going to have that conjunction there after the second one before the third one. So you would put the comma before the conjunction. So milk, comma, bread, comma, and eggs. That putting that comma before that conjunction and that's called the Oxford comma rule. If you didn't know that, write that down. Okay. The reason why I'm stressing this is because that's always been the predominant way that we've always done it. Okay. However, in the past several years, within the past, what is it now? Oh God, I'm getting old. About 10 years, they have made it socially, grammatically correct. It's grammatically correct now in America, not in England, because you ain't gonna take that Oxford comma from them. But now in America, it is socially, not socially, it's not. I mean, it is, but it's not. But it's grammatically correct to not put the second comma. So if you put milk, comma, bread, and eggs, it is now okay. You do not have to follow the Oxford comma rule. You can leave that comma off there. Okay, this is like one of those trick questions. So here's the thing. They're both grammatically correct. Either putting the comma there or leaving it off. They're both correct. Isn't that wild? So, because they just thought, well, we want to make it a little easier. Now, me, you're always going to find me following that Oxford comma rule. I mean, it's just in my blood. I can't help it. I think it's important. I think it's needed, but to each his own. But they're both correct. All right. It's never going to be a single option where you have to pick one between the other because they're both correct. So, make sure you know that. Introductory phrases or clauses, like I just touched on, when you have an introductory phrase, you have a transitional phrase. If those are at the beginning of your sentence, they're going to typically be offset by a comma. If you have a dependent clause first, that's offsetting it by a comma. So after finishing his homework, that's not a clause. There's no subject. Okay. So that would be what we call prepositional phrase, or an introductory clause. Before the rain began to fall, that's a dependent clause. So since the dependent clause comes first, you put the comma at the end. If there is what we call a non-essential or parenthetical expression smack dab in the middle of your sentence, which is essentially what that means is that there's extra information that doesn't have to be there, but it's really good to have. Then you're going to put commas around it. It's almost like it's acting as parentheses. We don't use parentheses in grammar, we use commas. Okay? Parentheses are for the math people over there. Take that to brain and craft. But with grammar, we're going to use commas to offset stuff. So if I say the book, which was written in 1902, is still popular today, I could have just said the book is still popular today. That's the gist of what I'm trying to say. I just added extra information with which was written in 1902. Okay. So that's extra information. It's a clause, which was written. There's our subject verb. So it's in there. We got to offset it. So we put commas around it. Always had trouble knowing when to use a semicolon and a comma. So here's the thing about semicolons. They are a very special reserve. Okay. I always tell my composition students in my freshman comp classes that you never want to use a semicolon. You only use the number of semicolons that you have in per page in your paper. So if you have a 4-page paper, you're not going to use more than 4 semicolons. Okay? They are not something to just willy-nilly be thrown around. But a semicolon can be used if you have an independent clause on each side of it. That's the rule. Hard and fast. If there's not two independent clauses on each side of it, then that semicolon's in the wrong place, Shug. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Semicolons, they have to have two independent clauses. There's like the big boy of the period. Okay? It just takes it one step further. Now, here's one I do want to touch on. I know we're running out of time, but we're going to get through this, y'all. So, one thing I want to touch on because I've seen it a lot. When you are separating, when you have two adjectives that are describing the same noun, okay, and they are what we call of equal value. So, the little brown dog. So, brown and little, they're about equal, you know. They could be switched. I could have said the brown little dog. I mean, it flows better to say the little brown dog, but I could have said brown little dog. When you have two adjectives describing that same noun like that, you want to separate them by using a comma. Okay? And then this is another one that people underestimate is the quotations. Again, we don't have a lot of time to go into this, so do the deep dive with the on demand, but make sure that you know the rule about offsetting your commas with your quotations. Okay? So if the tag comes at the end, you put a comma at the end if it would have been a period or just a period. Um, if the tag comes first, you put the comma after it to introduce the quote, but keep the tag attached to the beginning. Now, if it's got a question mark or an exclamation mark, or it needs a question mark or an exclamation mark, those override a comma, so you wouldn't put a comma there. All right. So again, unfortunately, we only have an hour, so we don't have time to dive into that as much as I would love to. So make sure to check out the on-demand video. We are going to get in 1.3 before we go. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So correct sentence structure. So this kind of ties in with what we talked about before. Subjects, make sure that when you have a sentence, you have a subject and you have a verb. Okay? That's the parts of the sentence you really have to have. So the subject is who or what the sentence is about. The verb can either be an action verb or it can be a linking verb. But regardless, if you have a sentence, if you have an independent clause, you have to have a subject, you have to have a verb. We've already talked about what independent and dependent clauses are, so make sure you know that and you can find those because they'll come right out and say which one of these is independent, which one of these is dependent. And we're going to do some great practice with those because I got some trick question ones for you. So we're going to look at that. We've talked about, see, 1.2 and 1.3 really kind of tie in well with each other. 1.3, again, make sure you can identify, is it a simple, is it a compound, complex, or compound complex. So that's your homework between tonight and Wednesday night when we come back and do our practice questions. So make sure that if I were to say which one's the simple, which one's compound, you could find it. Okay? With 1.2, you have to know what it is in order to tell me if it's punctuated correctly. But it's still there. So can you find out if it's simple, compound, complex, or compound complex? Yep. See, we did it. Told you. 1.3 just runs with 1.2 so well. All right, so we have just now hit it in our hour mark. Are there any questions before we wrap up and go? Let me know because I don't mind sticking around for a couple of minutes. If you don't have any questions, I know we really ended kind of abruptly. It's just so much to cover in such a short amount of time. But if you don't mind, feel free to give us some feedback on the webinar. Wednesday night, like I said, we'll be back. We'll be doing nothing but practice questions. We'll take each of the concepts we learned tonight and learn how to apply them to practice questions. Well, like I said, if you guys have any questions, drop them in the chat section and I'll be happy to answer those. If not, thank you guys so much for joining in. I hope you enjoyed the night. And I hope to see you guys back on Wednesday night. All right, like I said, I will stick around for a few minutes, but if not, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. All right, well, it looks like everyone's logging off, so I'll see you guys Wednesday.